being with me, 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 being with me. Tap being with me, being with me, being with me, being with me, being with me. Tap being with me, being with me, being with me.
Is your mic used for spoken word, music, comedy, or podcasts? Why don't you take a seat on my couch and share your craft? Focus on the future, reminisce about the past. This segment pinpoints your journey to the top, so make your presence felt before the mic drops.
Tap being with me, 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 being with me.
This is the mic drop with B. Anderson, and this is season one finale. Um, it has been a great season, to say the least. I appreciate all of my guests who were willing to come on and who believed in me and allowed me to use my platform to share your gift. I also appreciate all of the viewers who supported me and shared all of my stuff. Today, we are sitting down with a very special guest, someone who was on the very first open mic that I ever did. It was virtual, but it was the first one. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself.
Oh, hello. Um, my name is Manuel Iris. I am a poet. I am a bilingual poet. I write in English and Spanish. I was born in Mexico, but I've been in the Queen City for a long time now, and I am the former poet laureate of this wonderful city of Cincinnati, and I am very happy to be with you, B. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, let's dive right into it. What did it mean to you to be poet laureate of Cincinnati?
It meant a lot to me in very different senses. I became the poet laureate of the city in 2018. My tenure went from 2018 to 2020. And this was, if you remember, as we all do, a very difficult time politically.
Mm-hmm.
This was a time where there was an anti-immigrant rhetoric, and in particular, an anti-Mexican rhetoric coming from the highest office in the government of this country.
Mm-hmm.
So being a poet publicly was a political act, even when my poems do not talk about politics in their subject, but just having the space and the dignity to represent myself, which is also representing others, in that way was important to me. I also got to meet, thanks to this, I also got to meet a lot of wonderful people because it opened spaces and started friendships like the one we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
It was somehow thanks to that. So I am very thankful. It was an event that changed my life, and it changed my poetic career, and I think that maybe it had impacted even my poetics, the way that I think about poetry, the way that I think of myself as a poet, the way that I think about inhabiting the world poetically, because it helped me to meet individuals whom have shaped me in different ways. I inhabit the city differently, and I inhabit these friendships differently, and several things happened in those years. I mean, several things happened to all of us in all of these years, from 2020 to now. It has been like a century in just a couple of years. But becoming the poet laureate of this city has been one of the biggest honors of my life. and I will always be very thankful for it.
Do you think that since 2020 it has enhanced your writing style?
Yes, I think that my writing style changed in different ways. Um, Before 2017 or something like that, I didn't plan to have a poetic life in the United States. I was publishing everything, even though I was living in here, I was publishing everything in Mexico or in Latin America or in other um, Hispanic, Spanish speaking countries. And I didn't have any interest in translate myself and starting a life in the local poetry scene. Then in 2018, more or less, I realized that I was going to stay. And then I decided to try to be a poet also here. And I started to translate. I am my own translator, so I started to translate my own work. Now with the idea of being able to do this at the same time in these two parallel worlds that I was inhabiting. And then happened the poet laureateship, and then I had my daughter. I mean, my wife and I, we had our daughter, and we life changed, and it's impossible for poetry to remain the same when the life of the poet is changing.
Absolutely. And after your tenure as poet laureate ended, we kind of moved into the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect you as a poet?
Well, the pandemic affected all of us in many ways. Some of us, it was my case also, lost people that we love, friends, family. Some of us have our jobs affected, changed, ended, etc. But it was also an opportunity to recalibrate our priorities. We found what was really important and really essential in life. Like there is a short story of Sherlock Holmes where he's trying to steal a picture from a house, in the house of Irene Adler. But he knows that that picture is also her most valuable possession. So he pretends that there is a fire in the house because he knows that she's gonna run and save the most important thing in her life from the fire. The pandemic was like that. The pandemic was the fire. And whatever you try to rescue from the pandemic, if it was your family, if it was your health, if it was, that became the most important thing. Well, you realize that it was all the time the most important thing for you. So for me, the pandemic was the enormous realization or the confirmation that simplicity was very important to me. I focused on my family, and I focused on poetry, and I focused on the ways that the things that will remain should be cherished and defended. You know, I was very lucky that my daughter was very young. She was a baby. So I had a reliable source of joy in the house. And everything was falling apart. But inside of the house, there was this powerhouse of love and happiness. And that all of that process, because there was also, you know, when we talk about the pandemic, we can also talk about the killing of George Floyd, and we can also talk about the elections, and we can also talk about, you know, January 6th and all of it. It was very chaotic. We still have not understood all of the things that happened during that time. We will understand them in 10 years, in 20 years, when we read it in history books. But all of that was right there and happening. And what I was trying to save from the fire was my family and my own soul. And one of the ways that I did that, or tried to do it, was with poetry. I also discovered that it is my way to survive and to cope.
Absolutely. You're an award-winning author of multiple books, but I want to touch on your journey to writing your first book because, obviously you were writing poetry before composed this book. But what made you decide, hey, I want to put a collection of poems into a book?
Yeah, well, there is a book that I almost never talk about, which is my first book. I was very young when I wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time I was writing poems all the time, as any young person, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of youth to try to find a voice.
Yeah.
And one of my siblings is much younger than me. This difference in age used to be greater. It's the same amount of years, but it used to be more significant. That's what I should say.
Mm-hmm.
We are about 15 years apart, which now is not that important. We're two adults. But when he was about 3 years old, 4 years old, and I was a teenager, the process of my little brother of learning how to talk was magical to me, because he would often say poetic things or things that I would hear as poetic.
Mm-hmm.
So I started collecting the things that he would say and making poems around them or from those things. And I shamelessly titled that manuscript Stolen Verses, because I was stealing them from this natural born poet, because I think that kids are born poets, right? And then we shed the poetry off. And it's a book of poetry for children that I published. I was very, very young. It was 2014, I think, or 2010, something like that, when I published this book. Thanks to a fellowship that the government of the state of the Yucatan gave me. This is my life in Mexico. I had no idea that I was going to live in the United States at this point in my life. And I published that first book of poetry of children's poetry because one of my teachers, when I was studying literature, she told me, this is well done. You could publish this. And I tried, and it happened. And then 7 years passed between that book and the book that is often considered my first book, which is a book that won a National Award of Poetry and was published nationally, and it was a bigger deal. It was the book which most of the people that knows me now as an author knows me for this second book and not for the very first one, because they have very different lives. However, this very first book is the only one that I have published while living in Mexico. The rest of my books I have written here in the United States and published there.
How did it impact your life, pre-author, post-author?
That is an interesting question. That is a very interesting question, because I think that being an author is like being a parent, or maybe like it's not something that you can undo. Once that book is out, as much as you try to hide it, if you suddenly don't like it anymore, you cannot hide it anymore. It is out, and it has a life by itself, and it does not depend on you, and it will remain there after you die. It is a very deep commitment with ink, much deeper and much everlasting than a tattoo, for example, because the tattoo will rotten with your body, but the ink in a book will stay in the book when your body's not there.
That's a good analogy.
So this is a deeper, and it's a much more lasting compromise with ink, to say it that way. So in some ways, it's very good to have the books out, and some people don't know you, but they know your books, or when they know you, they already read you, so they know something about you.
Mm-hmm.
But that is good and bad because the books stay in a stage in your life. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like sometimes people approach me and they talk about one of my books, and I am in a completely different moment
Yes.
of my life and my poetry, and it's like listening to someone talk about a past life, and it's interesting. I like the experience. I also wrote the things because I don't want to forget them. It's a way to encapsulate time, you know. But um, sometimes I am afraid that I would publish something that shouldn't be published. I am very careful with my books. It looks like I have a lot of books. Not really. I have written about 4 books, but I have published like 10. Because 6 of them, or a number like that, are compilations. So it's an
Gotcha.
anthology. I grab from this, or is the translation to this language, or the translation to this other
Yeah.
language. So they look like a lot of titles because they have different titles. When I make the new compilation, I give it a title. But it's not that many poems. You will read the same poems in 3 or 4 different books,
Mhm.
right? And that is because I believe that writing a book, at least in my case, is a very slow process. I need a lot of time, not only to write the poem, but to be convinced that the poem is ready to be read by others.
Mhm.
I do not trust myself a lot.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to get over the anxiety of not knowing if what I'm saying is well said or if it matters at all.
Well, you have a couple of bilingual books.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if everyone knows that, but what made you go the route of a bilingual book?
It was the necessity. If I wanted to be a poet in Cincinnati, I needed to be able to read my poems in both languages.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it was important to communicate the idea of the poems in English, so we can have, for example, this conversation. This conversation would never happen if I was only reading my poems in Spanish to the Spanish-speaking people in Cincinnati. So it gives me the opportunity to meet to a broader audience, but I didn't want to renounce to the original language, and more than the original language, I didn't want to renounce to the original music of the poem. And the original music of my poems is the Spanish language.
Gotcha.
So it is important for me, for example, when I do readings, as you know, I read in both languages because I want all of the audience to appreciate the sound, the original sound of the poem, but also to know what the poem is talking about.
And that was the next question that I was going to ask you about, because the first time that I ever heard you, you did the poem in English and in Spanish. What is the process of that? Like, do you say the poem in English and then go back and say the same thing in Spanish again, or is it just a different part of the poem? Like, are you saying different parts in English and Spanish?
You're talking about the reading of the poems,
Yes,
or
the
about
reading.
the writing of the poems?
The reading.
The reading. No, I usually have the poem read in the full poem read in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read it in Spanish. Some people have asked me, why don't you read it in the original language first?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I do this is a secret. This is something I learned from a very important poet in Latin America. He just recently died, called Ernesto Cardenal, Nicaraguan poet, amazing poet. And I saw him reading live once in Cincinnati. Actually, he came to Cincinnati, and he had his poems read in English first, because he wanted the audience to already know what the poem was about when he read it in Spanish. So it's like, I want you to know what the poem is about, but you'll be able to appreciate the sound, because when I read first in Spanish, people are guessing what the poem is about, and they are trying to catch words, and it becomes a different kind of game. It's not just listening and enjoying. So I copy that from him.
So, like down in Mexico, is it done the opposite way? To where it
Well, in Mexico, just like in the United States, it's not usual to read poems in both languages. What I usually, for example, this book was published at the same time in Mexico and in the United States. In Mexico, it was published only in Spanish.
Gotcha.
But it was published in the bilingual manner here.
Okay.
So here is where I do those two readings, because I have an important part of my audience that is only English speaking. Sometimes I have audiences where they where I have part of the audience that also is Spanish speaking. But if it was the other way around, for example, if my original language was English and I would go to Mexico, I would like to read the English language too, because I would like them to hear the original sound of the language. But when I go to Mexico, the original sound of the language is the Spanish. So I just stay there.
Right.
And I have no need to go into English.
Gotcha. What fuels you to write?
That is a very short question with maybe a really long answer. You know, I would say that there are different kinds of fuel for different kinds of poems. You know, sometimes, for me, for example, in this book, the poems were about, the intention of the poems is to save from oblivion moments that I don't want to forget, or moments that I know I will forget. You know, because time passes. But then when I put those moments, those words in the poem, they will remain there. Sometimes the poem is an exploration of an idea or an image, or is just the chasing of a musical theme. I write a lot with my ears. Following the sound of my ears. So I would say that there are different, in my process, there are different fuels that give, as a result, a different kind of poem. But I never steer away from the sound. I depend of the melody of the words. That's the thread that I pull. And then the idea, the epiphany, the miracle of poetry happens, or I stumble upon those things searching for a musicality, or searching for beauty. It's like, in my case, I'm looking for beauty, and I stumble upon the truth, or a truth, or an epiphany.
Got you. I read something where you talked about the anxiety of parenting and poetry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So what do you think was like the root of the anxiety to, when your daughter was born, and trying to find time to write, and then
That was the root of the anxiety. Yes.
and it's a two-part question, because the other part is, how did you eventually overcome this anxiety?
Yes. Well, the first part of the question, this is a very good question. Also, because this was a new anxiety. This was something that I was not prepared to. I've been writing for more than half of my life, but I've only been a parent for 4 years. So this was completely new. I was getting used to the idea of being a poet in the United States, of translating my own work, of knowing the local poetry scene and all of this. And then, but all of this that I'm telling you is happening outside of my house, right? This is all the non-domestic reality.
Yes.
This is the literary reality. But parenting as you know,
Mm-hmm.
is a deep change in every intimate thing that happens in the house.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the place you eat, the place you sleep at, you know, your daily routine, the way how many hours do you sleep? All of those things are changed. Also, because the personality of the artist, maybe not all artists, but my personality certainly tend to be very egocentric. The world is um, revolving around my poetic creation and around the things that I'm going to read and the things that I'm thinking and this all of these sounds. But then parenting shifted the center of my universe outside of me. And it became at the beginning a source of anxiety because it was precisely about time. Where am I? How am I going to find the time to be a devoted and loving father, an involved father? Because a bad father could write all of the books in the world.
Mm-hmm.
When you don't care about your kid, you could write all of the books, but that was not what I wanted to do.
Right.
I wanted to put parenting first,
mm-hmm.
and then find the time to write. I didn't want to find the time to write or put my writing first and then find the time to parent. You know? So
yeah.
it was also a decision because I've known writers, especially male writers,
mm-hmm.
that decide their parenting around the writing.
Yeah.
You know, it's very different with female writers, right? The motherhood has been a subject of literature, and there are all these poems about motherhood and about being a mother, but something happens to males,
mm-hmm.
you know, a different expectation of society, many things. So I had that anxiety of when am I going to write and where. I'm going to give you, and I'm sorry for this very long answer.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But the first time that I had a house, an apartment actually, with a studio was right before my daughter was born.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time, I had a studio that had an apartment that had an extra room. And that extra room became my studio, my library, etc. When my wife and I knew that we were going to have a baby, that studio became the baby room. So the first thing that my daughter took over was my space.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was the bed of the baby and etc., her crate, surrounded by my books. So first, it was the space. And I thought, well, it's fine. I can just grab the book and read in the living room, you know. But then when the baby was born, and she was there, then the baby took over my time. It was not only the space, it was the time. And also, I didn't want to write a lot when she was born because I was too busy just staring at her. You know, I was too happy. People say that it's difficult to write when you're sad.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that it's even more difficult to write when you're happy. Because when you're sad, you maybe want to write, you know,
yes,
to take it out.
Yeah.
Exactly. But when you're happy, why would you write? Why would you stop the moment of happiness to write about it?
Right.
It is writing sad is difficult, but writing when happy is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would you?
You're not going through anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't want to stop what is happening. You
mm-hmm.
know, when you're going through something and you write, that something stop being the reality to become the subject of your writing.
Yes.
You know, you did put a stop, but it's like nobody wants to stop eating a meal to write about the meal.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
But you maybe want to stop pain to write about the pain.
Yeah.
You know, because you stopped it. So I was too happy to write.
Yeah.
So for a good 1 year or something, I was collecting emotions and I was collecting words to be able to write. And then I realized how to get over that anxiety because I was anxious. I was like, maybe this is the end of my writing career. Maybe this is it. Maybe I wrote things and I'm gonna have to wait for my daughter to go to college to be able to write, you know? I thought about these things and I felt really bad. But then it something clicked when I started writing again, and I wanted to write, about my usual subjects, death or time or transcendence. And I started writing about those things, but now the medium to get to those subjects was my daughter. So I was still going to talk about time, still going to talk about death or, literature in general, or about poetic creation, which is also one of my obsessions. But I started talking about those things while talking about my daughter. So I realized that she, even though she took over the space and the time, and now she took over my poetry itself, she was also the source of it. So I realized that I had less time than ever to write. But I never in my life wanted to write more, because there was this constant source of poetry. And I have this urge to leave testimony of all of this everyday miracles that were happening, in the house. So I wanted to leave testimony of those things. So now I don't have a routine. I used to have a routine. Now I write whenever I have a free space. I read whenever I have 5 minutes, and I'm trying to find those. And I know that it will change.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah, I love it, man. Would you like to recite a poem?
Yes, I can read a poem. I'm gonna read. This is a very short poem.
Okay.
I'm choosing short poems because, as you know, I'm gonna read them twice. So I'm gonna read it in English and then in Spanish.
Okay.
The poem is called Clarification, and it's about poetry itself. Clarification. It is a lie that trees do not know the world. A tree travels by virtue of its birds, and it also travels inward when sinking its roots. It all makes sense. Nothing is more fixed to the earth than a tree. Nothing moves more through the air than a bird. It is a fruit that flies. And poetry is the fact that they need each other. Aclaración. Es mentira que los árboles desconocen el mundo. Un árbol viaja por medio de sus pájaros y también viaja hacia adentro al hundir sus raíces. Todo tiene sentido. Nada está más fijo en la tierra que un árbol. Nada se mueve más en el aire que un pájaro. Es un fruto que vuela. Y la poesía es el hecho de que se necesite. And that was that.
Hey, I appreciate that, man. It just sounds so good when I hear it in Spanish. And that's how I felt the first time that I heard you. I said, I didn't understand it, but it just sounded, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And, I can appreciate you coming from that perspective of, giving us the poems in English and Spanish. I appreciate that.
For me, it's very important. I wouldn't feel truth, to myself and the reader if I didn't share the sound of the poem.
Well, this is the part of the show where I'm going to ask my guests 2 miscellaneous questions.
This is the part that got me nervous.
So, the first question that I'm going to ask you is, what is the one thing that you can say gives you balance in life? Like, because you have a very busy schedule, you're in and out of town, you're a father, you're an author, former poet laureate. So what is the one thing that you can say that when all else fails, it kind of creates that balance for you?
It is my family.
Family.
It is my family. I try to, one of the reasons that my schedule is so busy and etc. is because I try to always make sure that I have time for and to my family.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not easy to find in the other time the space to do other things, because um, I am a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I am also writing. And writing, as you know, is two different lives. There is the intimate life of the writer, where you're alone with your words,
Yes.
writing, and then there is the public life, like this that we're doing.
Yes.
You know, and the one that I enjoy the most is the one where I'm alone writing, doing things. I think I am an extrovert, but I am an extrovert that gets tired easily, and that's why I prefer to be a page poet than a stage poet,
Mm-hmm.
because I know my friends, with all of our friends, their books are here. Most of them are stage poets, and they get energy from the crowd. I don't. I lose it. When I walk off the stage, I am tired. You know, I love it. I love it while I'm on the stage, but I like the fact that the book can do its thing without me there. You know. So I find the balance between this energy and the other energy, always centered. And when I come back from work or from a reading or from whatever is the event, from a poetry conference, to go back to the, I was going to say, to the quiet place of my house, but my house is not quiet. I have a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
But to that nurturing noise,
Mm-hmm.
to those sounds, and to that calm, to that sacred space.
My second question: what is the biggest goal on your list that you're yet to achieve?
I honestly think that poetry is a state of grace. Inside of the poem, there is a truth that you didn't know before you wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you start writing the poem, and you don't know where the poem is gonna go, and suddenly you write that verse that just shines because it just spoken to transcendence. The poem is wiser than its author. And my biggest goal, because I think it's not a small thing, is to be able to achieve actual poetry when I write. That, when I say actual poetry, I'm talking about those poems that are almost a miracle. It's not just intelligence. It's not just cleverness. It's not just play on words. It's not just a political stand. It's achieving that glimpse of something beyond this reality.
Gotcha.
And I hope I get to do that. I doubt that I've done it. Some of my poems, I could say that I've been close, but I wish one day to write one of those poems, like poems from people that I see, and I just wonder, how were they able to say those things with those words? The day I feel like I wrote one of those, I retire. I'm done. Like, guys, anything can happen now. I achieved a true poem. I touched poetry once.
Gotcha. Well, before we get out of here, would you like to tell people, first, where they'll see you next, and second, where are you on websites or social media or things of that sort?
Well, people will see me next in some poetry readings that will be happening in the city in the fall. And to know the exact dates and etc., you can follow me on social media. I am Manuel Iris. There is an author page that you can see. And I am also in Instagram as Manuel Iris Poet. And my website, which is the to-go place, is manueliris.com. And that's it. Thank you, author, for having me. And this has been a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you. This, like I said, is the season finale. So the next time you will see me as far as the mic drop with B. Anderson will be next year, where I will actually be the guest sitting on the couch, and my sister Gifted will be interviewing me. So I'm really looking forward to that. Very excited about that. As I said before, I am very thankful to all 15 guests that have come on, from Lady J to Vibe One to Jamila Wright to Des Scruggs to Skylar McCrae to Amy Tuttle to Kimberly Duwop Bowden to High Fever to Laura Wise to Gifted to Tisa Remedy to Black Daryl to Miss Ebony J to China Horton Olayton, and to my guest here, Manuel Iris. I appreciate all of you. I appreciate all of my viewers. I am very thankful for you making the mic drop with B. Anderson possible. So thank you, everyone. And I can't wait to be back with more exciting guests. This has been the mic drop with B. Anderson, and we are out. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and comment on it, and subscribe to my channel for more exclusive content like this.